Hello Finxters! Today we're going to be looking at how to read and write a JSON file with Python using the Python JSON module. And so the topics we're going to cover in this video include what JSON files are, how are they structured, we'll introduce you to the Python module called JSON, we'll show you a couple of methods to read a JSON file, and we'll show you a couple of methods to write a JSON file. And then finally, we'll talk to an alternative method of reading a JSON file. So what are these files and why are they used? So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and this is a human-friendly text format for exchanging data. And JSON files are effectively just a text file, but they have a very specific format and structure, which we'll see shortly. And JSON is language independent. In fact, most major programming languages have the ability to generate and pass JSON formatted data. And as I said earlier, the data in a JSON file has a very specific structure. So let's talk about that. Now, if you're a Python user, you are familiar with list and dictionary data types. And JSON uses two such structures. It uses a collection of name-value pairs, and we would call key-value pairs for our dictionary. And it uses an ordered set of values, and we would recognize that as a list or potentially as an array. So very familiar when you look at it, and let's do just that. So here's an example of a JSON file, and on first glance it is exactly what you would expect to see with the curly brackets in Python for a dictionary, the key being employees, and the values obviously being the various employees underneath there. And then the same key contractors and the values being the contractors underneath. And you see the list notation of the square bracket, so it looks very, very familiar to us in Python and has great similarity to what we understand. So let's talk about the Python JSON module. And so this module needs to be imported into your code. And effectively, it provides you some methods to read JSON data into Python objects, and it provides you a method to write from a Python object into JSON data. So let's look at the read first, and there's two methods there. There's the JSON.load method, which takes a JSON file and converts it into a Python object. And then there's another one which has an S on the end, JSON loads, and the S stands for string. So it converts a JSON string into a Python object. So if the data comes as a string rather than a file-like object, you can pass it directly to loads. And in the write methods, we have two very similar methods. One is JSON.dump, converting a Python object such as a dictionary or list into a JSON file, and dumps, which has the S again, converting a Python object into a JSON formatted string. So let's go and do some coding and have a look at what that looks like. So what I've got here is a JSON file, and I've created this just showing some used vehicles. It might be a used car lot that uses this to control its stock. And so we have a key cars here, and then we have three cars, Audi, Peugeot and Toyota underneath that, with the various data against each of those. And we have another key, trucks, and a couple of truck models there. So this is the classic layout of a JSON file. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this used vehicles.json and we will load it into a Python object. So first thing to remember, as I said earlier, is we need to import JSON. And there's the syntax. It's very simple. Import space JSON. Then what we need to do is we need to open that used vehicles.json file. And the syntax I've used here with open brackets used vehicles.json as file. The reason I've used the with is it just makes it a lot easier. When you open that file, if you do it within the with command, it will automatically close once you're complete. Otherwise, you would need to remember to do a close command at the end. So with open used vehicles.json as file, and this is just an arbitrary name, it can be whatever you want it to be. Stock, which is what we're going to pass it to, equals json.load file. So it's very simple. And having done that, and when you run that, you have now converted that JSON file into a Python object, which is contained in stock. And then we can act on it as we would normally within Python. So here I've done for cars in stock, key value cars, print cars, and similarly for trucks. So let's just have a look at what that looks like when it's run. And you can see down the bottom here, there you have the individual cars with their key value pairs and the individual trucks with their key value pairs. So it's now converted it into Python dictionary and lists, which we can then access. And so just to make that a little bit more readable, I'm just going to uncomment that, and I'll comment that just to show you that we can access what we need. And let's run this, which is actually going to take for cars in stock cars, and we'll print the make, the model, and the year of manufacture. And we'll see how that displays. So there you have it in a much more user-friendly format. So very simple, load and or loads. And we'll take you across to the loads method now just to show you that the syntax is a little bit easier, a little less code. So we've just shown you load. Let's go across here to loads. And so once again, with the loads, we have imported JSON. I've also imported pretty print just to be able to output the result of this in a nice, reasonable format. So that's just from pretty print, import pretty print. We then have a vehicles_JSON string. And once again, it's all the format that we saw just previously. And that's very simple. All we wish to do is we wish to take json.loads with the S now because it's a JSON string, and we're going to load vehicles_JSON, and we'll pass it to the vehicles dictionary variable, and then we'll print that and you will see the outcome of that. So let's do that now. And there you see the string has been converted into a Python dictionary, and once again you can make use of that with your standard Python syntax to extract what you need for your uses. Okay, so we've talked about reading the files. Now let's talk about writing JSON files. So we'll go across here. Now the write, as you remember, uses the dump and dumps method. And so once again, we're going to import JSON. I have a dictionary here, which has got employees and their names, employee numbers, and contractors with their name and contract numbers. And I want to convert that to a JSON file. So we're going to do again with open command. We will have a URL or a path name as to where we wish the file to be sent to. We use the write, the W command here, to say that we're going to write to that as file, and then we carry out the JSON.dump. We want to take the employees dictionary and we want to print it to file. And the indent 4 is just to make the file a little more readable when it actually goes in, and you'll see that it's using a 4-space indent to lay the file out, and it makes it a little more pretty, if you like. And before we actually activate that, let's just head across to Python tutorial, and there is one in there that I'm going to delete, just so that you can see that there's now nothing in Python tutorials. And let's go back to this code and we'll run that. And that's now finished, so we'll go back to that Python tutorials, and there we have the JSON file, which I'll open with Notepad and I'll show you the layout of that. So open with Notepad, and there you see the layout of the file in JSON format. So once again, a very simple command, dump. It will take the dictionary and it will simply convert it to a JSON format file for you, but readable with any text editor. And of course we have the dumps that we can also work with, so I'll just show you that. Let's comment that out. Let's uncomment this. Very similar, JSON.dumps, so we're going to actually print to a JSON string format, and we're opening employees dictionary. Once again, we use the indent and it will pass it to employees_JSON. We'll then print that and you'll be able to see the layout of that JSON string formatted file from our Python dictionary. So just running that now. And there we have it. Let me enlarge that just to make that a little bit easier to read. And there we have the JSON string formatted information which has been taken from our dictionary. So quite simple, the basics of the JSON methods. But if you don't wish to use JSON, there is another alternative, and that is using the requests library. And requests is a module that is used for HTTP requests. You might be doing some web scraping, but it also comes with a JSON method that allows you to do very similar things. So if you don't wish to use JSON for any reason, or if you're already using requests, you can import requests. I've done the pretty print import again up there, and the requests get, we're going to go and look at the GitHub API.com, and we will pass that to a response, and then we'll simply get response.json and we'll pass it to our converted file, and then we'll print that, and you'll see the JSON file that we've received from api.github.com will be printed out as a Python object. So let's just run that quickly. And I'll open that up because that's quite a big file. And there you see it printed out with the key and the value, key value all the way through. So request is an alternative for you if you don't wish to use JSON or you are already using requests. So just dropping back now to our slides. Just to summarize, we discussed JSON files, what they are and why they're used as a form of data interchange and used by most major programming languages who have the ability to read and parse the data. We looked at the file structure, which is very specific to JSON, and we introduced the Python JSON module, which allows you to convert JSON to a Python object or vice versa, take a Python object and convert it to JSON. We read a JSON file using the load and loads methods, remembering that the S stands for string, and you may receive the data in string format, so the loads would be your method of choice. We then wrote a JSON file using the JSON dump and JSON dumps method, once again similar, S for string, and then we introduced an alternative method of reading JSON using the request module. So I hope that helped. It's a question that's often asked, how to read a JSON file and how to make it usable within Python. It's a very simple structure, a very simple method, and I hope that cleared up any concerns you may have. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to meeting you at the next video. Goodbye.